Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I'm your host. Okay, so this is going to be a long one, mainly because we have a lot of things to go through in terms of news, especially things that happened at the very end of last week that I wasn't able to get through. So we're going to go through all of that this week because it's some really interesting, or at the very least, mind-bogglingly and kind of funny stuff when you get down to it. And then we also have the release of both Locke and Key on Netflix and the Birds of Prey movie. So if I have enough to say by the end of this about either of those two, they'll be at the end. And so let's head on right into it, because I take it easy one week and suddenly all hell breaks loose. And trust me, it broke loose in an extremely insane way on multiple fronts. So let's just get right into it. First off, we have this whole debacle regarding a tweet from some, I guess, personality on comics Twitter. I've never seen them around before, but apparently they have mutuals with me on several other podcasts and other prominent, or at least in terms of fandom figures. So I'm not quite sure how popular or how well known they were within fandom circles, but I won't divulge their identity because it literally doesn't matter anymore. In any case, they decided to do something really silly a couple days ago. Apparently, an indie comic creator, who I've seen here and there and have also mutuals with who like their work, made a fun tweet about how their pitch for a new series was picked up by Image almost immediately, like within 2 minutes. This unnamed person thought it was a good idea to subtweet that tweet for screenshot and then tag Image and Todd McFarlane directly in their own call-out tweet about how this was a classic case of corruption, nepotism, favoritism, and basically every and all this isn't fair conspiracy rhetoric they could think of. And understandably enough, a bunch of comp creators like Image, Indie, and Big 2 creators who know what this kind of thing entails decided to weigh in. So you had people who worked with Image, had been in similar situations, had these experiences, and had worked with these people before, and know things firsthand, that are giving their own 2 cents on why this guy is maybe a little bit misguided in calling someone out for just getting a simple job. And this person just doubles fucking down. They triple down. They go all in on how much more they know and perceive than people who have had the actual jobs and positions. It takes a unique mindset to get all of that out there, and it wasn't even harsh critique they were getting, but more attempts to try and set them straight. But to just go, no, I'm pretty sure I know more, is, well, insane, isn't it? Needless to say, this guy got it from all areas, except one, the ridiculous side of comics Twitter, also known as Comicsgate, because of course they would just jump on it, and for a very singular reason it seems, because this comics writer is part of the LGBT community, and they very vocally made clear that this nepotism, corruption, and favoritism was obviously the result of Image pandering to the LGBT reader community, and that it was unfair and biased that Image only made LGBT comics. And well, that's a load of horse shit for so many uncountable reasons. But what really gets me is that even if it were true that Image only made LGBT comics, which they don't, then they would be totally within their rights as a publisher to do that, especially if that was their corporate brand. And that means that if her pitch got accepted because they liked it for that brand, for their mission statement, for what their company produces, then that would be completely plausible and totally justified, thus defeating the entire claim that her pitch being accepted was shady and completely unethical. I mean, that's the kind of tunnel vision they're working with there. And just to get out of the way, we have to admit that comics were founded on nepotism and favoritism. For decades, that was probably the most surefire way to get a secure gig in the business. For every 14-year-old Jim Shooter who wrote in stuff, there was a Stan Lee or another who had family members or married in or had other huge connections. Even Image itself was founded by people who knew each other for other people they also knew. But now, since there's a lot of ways to enter the business, to enter the industry, to make yourself well known, it's more about what you do, what you write, and how you market yourself. And well, the person who got accepted clearly had their stuff together. I know about them. They have a brand. They have, well, a very notable personage in this kind of community. They put themselves out there. And some guy whose biggest claim is that he studied with the Writers Guild clearly isn't putting the work in to make things that will grow an audience. So don't hate on the hustle. You have to make your own. But unfortunately enough, it seems that they felt on cementing themselves to the ground. Even a day after, they were still saying, well, seems like I got the right people mad, and that means I've exposed deep-rooted corruption. And well, they got their account suspended. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. I hope they're gone, but I also hope they've learned from this experience, and that if maybe we see them again, then it's with a product they can be proud of selling and be confident putting out there. You can't drag others down just because you aren't where they are. And when you use it as a platform to disparage their identity and their life, then, well, get suspended, pricks. Oh, and one last thing. Apparently a big clarion call for this group that was really digging in on this person was that she doesn't even like making comics. Well, I guess all that time and effort spent making actual comics was just a huge prank then? I mean, think it out. Really put some thought into this shit. As for our next scandal this week, was that apparently Eric M. Esquivel and Eddie Berganza were teaming up to create their own publishing entity, which, I mean, that's just perfect. Two guys ousted from the industry for being pervs going into business together. And that's not even the worst of it. They, or at least Eric, had an opening statement about how they had learned their lesson that left them invigorated and with a new sense of purpose. That going through all that had made things extra clear about who their real friends were, and it made them more impassioned to succeed as minorities, as Latinos, which sounds bad when you're talking about your experience of being outed as a serial harasser. It's the opposite of reflective and penitent, coupled with just outright chilling yourself and your ethnicities. We're still not at the tip of the iceberg here either. The tip of this is that they were calling out for young talent and seemingly undiscovered young blood women on board who are looking for an in to the industry. You know, like the grooming shit they were doing before and that they were caught of doing before. That is just so fucking bold and repugnant that I don't even know what to say about it. Other than that, everyone else with sense saw through it immediately. Even his old collaborators had enough of his shit. Even Ramon Villalobos, who was insanely annoying with how much he talked up Bordertown as being a relation for Latinos, wasn't having jack shit with it. Because honestly, it's so pathetic and desperate. Now it's all just worry about who gets caught up with them. I really hope that whoever does join up, unsuspecting or unknowing, doesn't get entrapped like they have been doing with other people and how they've been treating other people. I'm hoping for the best for the people who might be victims or who might get caught up in the middle of anything. And I hope that Eric and Eddie sink and fall into obscurity once again, because it couldn't happen to two worse people. And at long last, we have the least formed of all the news that broke, this time being directly tied to Comicsgate. It seems like Richard Meyer, aka Old Man Zach, and Sylvester Stallone and Chuck Dixon, of all people, are teaming up to give Comicsgate the license to make an Expendables tie-in comic. Because why the fuck not? Bullshit, boring, and uneventful action comics is all they seem to want to do, so why not make a comic based off one of the worst wastes of potential in that genre? Honestly, I don't even know what they plan to do. Apparently it's going to be about the Expendables going to hell, which is a really lackluster and truly early 90s premise. I mean, it's probably going to be bad, even with Dixon's quote-unquote help and experience. They're likely already calling it another sign that their kickstarted alliance is a death knell for Main Street Comics, despite their entire fan base just being squeezed for every little bit of cash, and they themselves calling it a day. Because it's hardly a success when you have to get 50 or 70 bucks from every person who supports you. I mean, that's just less impressive. Like, hey, this one comic made 5 times as much as that one comic. Doesn't really mean as much when you charge 7 times the price or more. That's another story for another time. I guess Stallone will do anything to keep this shoddy and completely cardboard cutout franchise going. Fingers crossed down. Now we can head on to this week's news. There's only one noteworthy thing, which is that apparently Sam Raimi is being tapped by Disney to be the new director for Doctor Strange 2, which is such a waste of Raimi. It's only 3 months until filming starts, and they weren't even able to work things out with the last director they had, who was the director of the most bland MCU movie ever made. I mean, that guy directed a boringly executed as hell Doctor Strange 1, and they still weren't able to get him to do what they wanted. So I don't expect anything from Raimi. This is very likely going to be a plug-and-play Ron Howard on Solo style situation. I already see people trying to fool themselves into saying, man, this means that Doctor Strange is going to be really good, like a really stylish horror movie. And like, that's what Scott Derrickson wanted to do. He wanted to do that with Doctor Strange 1. He wanted to do that with Doctor Strange 2. And he left because Disney was against it. So why the hell would they let Sam Raimi do anything? It's just insanity. And very likely, Sam Raimi is only doing this because they gave him millions of dollars, and or they're going to greenlight a project of his that he wants to get off the ground. So be on the lookout for that, because I'm sure it's coming. Fingers crossed, but hopes are beneath the ocean. And lastly, we have apparently DC announcing the kickstart to their new reboot called Generation Zero for Free Comic Book Day. It's apparently going to center around Wally getting the powers of both Dr. Manhattan and Metron and just relaunching shit on his own and changing and rebooting stuff that he feels fit. So it's pretty much just Flashpoint 2 Wally Boogaloo. I've already seen people say that this spits on Kirby's legacy, and no. In like the last 30 years, this is one of the things that is maybe the least spitting on Kirby's legacy. Mr. Miracle committing suicide and dozens of other things have done that dozens of times over. This is just business as usual. Fingers crossed that at the very least 5G, which this is clearly staying the ground for, turns out to be something interesting. Oh, and I would be remiss to not mention the big Super Bowl ad for the Disney Plus MCU shows. They all look really boring, and WandaVision doesn't look interesting. Maybe if you hadn't seen any of the other interesting comic shows that have come out in the last 3 years, you would think that it is something insanely unique and lively. But no, it looks just as bland and boring as everything else could be. So, fingers crossed. Now we can head on to what I read this week. First off, we have The Dreaming number 18. Sometimes this series hits a snag, and sometimes it just knocks it out of the park. And sometimes it's a mix of both, because if there's anything this issue does is make it so clear that as long as you hit the right notes, land the emotional and thematic catharsis to a T, then you can be as inconsistent as you damn well want, because this issue kinda is. I mean, it's not a total mess, but a lot of it does feel like a hodgepodge of events crammed into a single issue. If I had to pinpoint a place, looking back, where it probably hits barrier that you'd have to start wrapping these loose threads up, it'd be this issue. Probably the biggest instance of this is finally bringing Ziggy back into the fold, except it's not the Ziggy from the last arc that we saw that also kind of went nowhere and that was sort of brushed off screen as Dora made it into reality, and it's never brought up, so it might not even happen anymore. Stuff like that. But how Spurrier handles his actual reintroduction and the previous threads like Dream's love subplot and everything that's been happening to Lucian, Mad, and Abel have been superb. They're so amazing. Much like the issue before last, it has that manic energy that makes everything feel simultaneously like it's falling to pieces, but also somehow completely in order. It helps that Spurrier's wry sense of humor and wit is on full display here and isn't pulling any punches with these characters and their interactions at all. It's delightful in all the best ways. It just brings everything to a high pitch of emotion and intensity, but also just realization and self-awareness for the characters, for themselves, and all that they can be. I like that. So you have really funny, really darkly cynical beats, but also capitulations on what these characters are and why they work. I think that Spurrier only has a couple issues left, but because of stuff like this, I'm gonna miss him and this series a lot. It makes me care for these characters while also not being afraid to put them in situations that are a little bit more dire or intense or probably less heartwarming than they can be, but they're poignantly so, and I love it. So overall, 2 thumbs up. And I can't wait to see where this goes from here and where it wraps up. Next up, we have Captain Ginger Season 2, number 1. Finally back with more Captain Ginger, and if you didn't read Season 1, here's a recap. Evolved humanoid cats adrift in a spaceship are searching for others like them. Hijinks and douchey aliens ensue, and they get a signal from what sounds like a dog. This picks up right from that, and it's still a nice comic. I think that I was expecting too much from a return. This feels less like a premiere and just like another issue, which it kind of is, to be honest. I like the characters and delving more into their predicament, so this appealed to me very well. But other than that, it's hard to call it out for anything in particular. It's really sedate. It's comfy, but it feels very calm and not at all that exciting. The characters are still enjoyable and not too demanding so far, but I think the previous season started out with a bit more kick than this, which does feel like a bit of a letdown, especially knowing how short these seasons are. And the idea is they seem to be sidelining or maybe not utilizing as much as they could. I really can't think of anything else to say other than that, but I will probably have to give it 2 scores. Personally, 2 thumbs up. I'm just happy to be back in this world, seeing where these characters are going. But overall, 1 thumb middle, 1 thumb up. It's just not engaging or exciting, and it's not that interesting unless you're really into this series. And, well, it doesn't really do much to entice more people to read it. It really doesn't. And now we head on into Martian Manhunter number 12. A perfect finale, honestly. It captured every moment so well. Even the stuff I was so worried about in previous issues, it was somehow able to make work. To make it feel like it was a bit more meaningful than it would have otherwise. Because it goes all in tying the physical, the action, and all that comes with that to the emotional. Making that emphatic core realized through the more overt and insanely titillating set pieces. I don't think it would have worked as well without Rosmo though. Because it's really through their art, their pages, their panels, and their structure that everything meshes together and merges so tightly. They feel like a unified whole rather than tonally inconsistent or jarring. The way it handles and punctuates John's 3-issue trek of soul searching to the huge crackdown showdown with the armored forces to whatever's going on with Not Miss Martian is somehow able to not feel out of place with each other. They all feel substantial and satisfying. It's maybe not the most subtle at times. I mean, we get a fucking finally I am Martian Manhunter bit, but it's never out of place. And it's truly heartfelt and passionate. Like, you can tell that these creators have a solid tether and connection to this character, to the story they're telling, and it makes you love the hell out of it. Apparently, Orlando is no longer exclusive with DC, and so this series makes for a hell of a mic drop. It's exciting, it's thrilling, and it's genuinely touching in all the best ways. I'm sad to see it gone, but I'm glad it stuck a landing because you really get a huge amount of depth out of John Johns, out of the Martian Manhunter, and you get a great, broad, and somehow intricate look at his character and what makes him work as a character, what makes him exciting and engaging, and comes together as a cohesive work, as something that I believe will be a modern classic to be remembered for years to come. Overall, 2 thumbs up. I can't wait to get the complete collection of this. And finally, we have the 3rd issue of Illuminated Comics' 4-issue Zora miniseries, Control Freak Conspiracy. And I have to say, I finally have a clear grasp on this series now, and that makes me want to go back and read all 3 issues at once. And if you pick this up, I definitely say that you should, because it'll be well worth it and you'll get so much more out of it. Because reading this 3rd issue, it hits me right in the face that it's kind of like vibing on the same wavelength of a Zucker and Abrams film, you know, the perfect Leslie Nielsen farces. It has this intense emotion and somewhat captivating stakes that puts you in a moment of the danger and the action and the excitement, but it's not afraid of just poking fun of itself and at the situations whenever it can, pushing things to the extreme of lunacy when it makes sense and when it calls for it. Incredible tonal mix that really hits, and it hits hard, and it hits the hardest in this issue because I had so much fun. I don't think I've laughed this hard at a comic since the last Zora one-shot special before this miniseries began, because it is so clever and it is just so on point. And again, it uses and reuses past Zora lore, as it were, to build on itself, and it feels more cohesive, it feels more structured than it probably has any right to be. But I think that it blends together so well and it makes for such a unique and thoroughly exciting and enjoyable experience. Then you get this complete transition to something that is exciting and dangerous, and it doesn't give you whiplash at all. It makes the case for itself in each situation because that's the atmosphere it's juggling, and it juggles it so well. It juggles it so damn precisely. Just like Airplane, or just like, I guess, Top Secret, where you have to be kind of invested in the sewer spy plot, or in Airplane, where you have to be kind of invested in the romance plot, just so that when they take the shit out of it, you're laughing as hard as you can because you understand where this story is going and why it's going this way. And nothing makes me feel more like that than this issue, because you have moments that are really dire, that are really extreme, that are kind of intense and suspenseful, and then it'll be juxtaposed sometimes on the next page, sometimes on the same page, sometimes within the same panel with something that is completely over the top and ridiculous, and it'll work. Like, I'm not even doing it enough justice by comparing it to the Zucker and Abrams movies, but it's the closest I can get. I love these characters, I love this situation, and the 3rd issue combines all these elements in maybe a perfect fashion. It is a true accomplishment, and I can't wait to see the finale, because right now I am on the edge of my seat, which is not something that I could have ever expected to say about a series that has used the same butt joke like 7 times already, and it just gets funnier every time you see it. So overall, 2 thumbs up. Thank you, Illuminated, for making more of these. These are so good, and I'll leave a link below to anyone who wants to try this series out, because I truly recommend it. You're missing out if you don't read this. So 2 thumbs up, and I can't wait for the finale. And now we can move on into what I watched this week. So let's start off with what I was able to see of Netflix's new adaptation of Locke and Key. Just like last week, I'm going to basically frame this review as a broad overview, but only basing it on the handful of episodes that I was able to finish by the time I was recording. Much like Sabrina Season 3, I doubt it'll be easily uprooted by whatever happens in the next couple of episodes that I will get back to next week. Just to get out of the way the show structures itself and the myth arc is better in this Netflix version. That's a lesson that they learned from the original pilot. As you might remember, that pilot crammed the entirety of the first arc of only a handful of arcs in this series into one 40-minute episode, which was very cluttered together. It was good, but maybe not sustainable for a series with multiple seasons planned. This wisely parses it out, but it parses it out in a way that isn't simply decompression. Not just stretching it out to let it breathe. Instead, it takes elements from throughout the series and is letting them run wild to fill in and pad out the gaps. I would have preferred the latter, but at least it's forward thinking. The only other positive I can think of is that the effects are better, especially with the ghost key. And that's about it. Like, just the fact that it knows how to partition the plot a lot more easily for weekly or at least pseudo-weekly individual episodes, and that it doesn't look like a very bad C-level movie this time in terms of how it's showing the effects of the keys. But other than that, the show was tepid, uninteresting, and kind of boring slog. To put it in really short terms, everything it does that it takes directly from the comic is executed in the least engaging way possible. The characters are less dynamic, the set pieces are less thrilling, and the storyline is just less entertaining and depthy. It's got a stilted, flat, and placid sense of energy, adventure, and suspense. Things just happen, completely throwing out the pacing and dread the comic was able to give the scenes. Just having them perfunctorily in the adaptation just because they have to be there for the events to make sense, not the fact that they're even building up to it. And that's a shame because it doesn't give any life to this. It feels like something you would just passively watch. There's no real immersion here. You're not being pulled into the horror, to the kids, to the characters. You're not having any kind of connection with it on any level. Characters are dumbed down all around, made less sympathetic, less likable, and even more annoying. Some examples are that a character is made into a douchey jock, or another is flattened out into a blandly cliche-ridden enigmatic love interest, and others are twisted into a stereotypical pop culture mouthpiece role. In effect, it's not utilizing any of the things that made the story or the comic unique, but rather emphasizing the attempts to make it exactly like everything else. Like they have to try to make Locke and Key more generic, and they're succeeding. These characters are a dime a dozen. They're no longer interesting or fleshed out. They no longer have any great connections with each other or back and forth or dynamics. They're the kind of characters you would be liable to see on Riverdale or Sabrina. And the storyline itself plays out as uninterested in itself as we are. There's no real engagement here. It takes out all of the thematic juice, takes out all the backgrounding, it takes out all the stuff that was there as world building in order to get us invested, in order to get us interested, and replaces it with nothing. It kind of expects us to be interested just by the merit of being a teen show with magical elements, but it never earns it. It just has every single punch and click cliche and role it needs to fill for these actors and for these characters. Like who's going to fall in love with who, or where are they going to name drop current fad or current pop culture icon or nostalgic 80s pop culture icon. And that's about it. It feels exactly like every other wannabe hip teen supernatural show. And that's a shame because there are things about this that could have really popped, that really could have, I guess, drawn you in. Stuff like how Gabriel Rodriguez's drafting and construction of those pages could have been a great visual blueprint to give this some life, at least in terms of what you are perceiving with your eyes. But even then, shots are flat, scenes are flat, and visually and aesthetically, paint drawing on the wall style. And that's pretty much it. There's nothing here that stands out. There's nothing here that pops out. There's nothing here that makes it worth watching, because it really isn't. You have boring, dull characters going around generic plot beats, emotional beats, and character beats, and that's it. And the things that it changes from the backgrounding, those are the things that give it flavor. Those are the things that make it interesting. Stuff like the thematic resonance of theater or Shakespeare and The Tempest and all of that stuff that I set up from the beginning. How these characters are so much more complex rather than just being jock and nerdy people. I'm not going to say that they were really fleshed out in the comic at all, because a lot of them weren't, but they were given a nice little twist, and the show seems adamant on making them reflections on everything else that's going on in another show. And it's a huge disservice to Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. It really is. It makes it too broad, it makes it too generic, and it doesn't capture your attention in the least. At least in the case of something like The Umbrella Academy, when it also stripped down things, it knew what to emphasize. It knew what needed to really be pinned down as the core impetus for its show, for its attitude. Locke and Key, everything else just seems like an afterthought. So overall, I think I'm only halfway through this season. I'll get through the next half of the season next week. But overall, right now, 2 thumbs down. Alright, so this is me recording this at a later date because I actually did decide to just go through all of Locke and Key, because I sure as hell wasn't going to wait a week to finish it up and wrap it up when I really wasn't enjoying it. And it turned out to be a good thing, because apparently the last 5 episodes, the second half of this season, are actually a lot better. Now let me put a caveat on this. I'm not going to take back anything I said about the first 5 episodes that I watched, because those were really bad and everything about them still carries over into the last 5 episodes. But what makes the second half that much better is that things start paying off a lot more successfully. You have all of these things in the first 5 episodes that are just a huge conglomeration of arcs and plot beats and things that are shuffled together and misused and mismanaged. But now that we have to start tying things off, you start to see a lot more coherency in the story that we're getting. While there is still a lot of the soapy, dumb, melodramatic aspects to it, to the characters, to what they do, and things that are just so nonsensical, the narrative itself, the myth arc, is actually really exciting and adventurous. Netflix is old hat at this kind of kid gang excitement thing. They've had a lot of shows like this, most notably Stranger Things, and this hits that on the head perfectly. It hits that tone, it hits that mood. You start to get a little bit invested because they're now being proactive and really in the situation where they have to think things through, and you're excited at least in the moment for that. You're excited because the show is starting to make sense. It's starting to come together in a very fluid way. So that's good. I like that a lot. But like I said, the rest of it is still weighed down by all of the nonsense in the first episodes and a lot of the nonsense that goes on these last 5. The characters are still acting really insipidly. They make horrible decisions. They make short-sighted decisions. But these are things that aren't like, oh, they could have thought this through, but things that are just so ignorant to the situation. You think that anyone would think this through in the least, like a 5-year-old could. There's a 5-year-old in this show that puts together faster than the older characters do. It's kind of a mess, it really is. But the thing is, it's a lot more exciting than it is. You start to see some actual respect for the story arcs of the show because they have to really adapt them when they're tying them off, and they do make some clever choices in how to translate plot beats from those arcs, from those conclusions, into a single run of episodes, because they start seeing them one after the other, and it gets you a little excited. It's a little bit thrilling, it's a little suspenseful, it's really got a good momentum to it, and I like that a lot. The finale is half and half. It's half really dumb, but also it has one of the most clever things I've seen in this show. Something that I didn't expect them to do, mainly because everything else that was supposed to lead up to it was thrown out in the trash. So when the show goes back to it, when the show actually says, oh yeah, we integrated that in this really clever and subtle way, I'm like, good on you. But then I'm also thinking that only really works as a surprise because of how badly you adapted a lot of these characters. So you wouldn't expect this to happen this way because you don't really recognize them at all from the comic. So it's a double-edged sword. It's only as effective as it is because of how bad it can also be. But it's also, on a very baseline measure, still pretty fun. I really do hope that the next season is the last season, because even this season could have been cut down by like 2 episodes if you got rid of all the stupid melodrama and stupid teen show fodder. And if the next season cuts down on that, then there's not much else they can do. There's not that much story left. You could have a full 10 episode second season and have all the rest of the plot beats of the rest of the arcs go on through, and it would be great. You would have a full thrilling season, and no more and no less. You could expand it a lot more. There are things that are left open for a 3rd season, but even then that would be asking for too much, because the characters themselves aren't what's carrying the show. It's the plot. And now that we've finally gone back to the plot, back to the story, back to where all the thematic stuff is heading, then yeah, no, that's what we need to focus on, and adding on to that is just going to make this a lot weaker, a lot less functional, a lot less durable. And it just took the long way around to get back to that, so I wouldn't want them to mess it up. But overall, the last episodes, solid, a lot of missteps, but they have a better energy to it, and they seem to know what they're going to do with these plots. So fingers crossed that second season doesn't continue to fumble the bag and actually learns from the mistakes of this, because it was a rough watch for the most part, including making several characters and plot dynamics worse. Even though things have gotten better, they're even worse now, because it definitely feels like someone read the comic and like had their own fan fiction headcanon that they're including into the shows. And that is very worrisome to me. But overall, 1 thumb down, 1 thumb up, because it is truly a mixed bag. And unfortunately, it seems I wasn't able to go see Birds of Prey this week. I'll try and get to it next week. Hopefully it turns out good. I'm already hearing great things from a bunch of people I trust, so fingers crossed. And now we can head on to listener questions. And our only question this week comes from the ever great Norn Radical, and their question is best melee weapon in comics. And 2 things came immediately to mind, so I'm going to mention them right now. Number 1, Arm Fall Off Boy's arms, because you have to applaud that gumption and that hustle. What else could you do with that? And he owns it. Second would have to be Big Barda's Club. I mean, look at that thing. That one is just magnificent, and it's ever present. It's sleek, it's iconic, it's totally memorable, and it's not imposing enough to feel like it's compensating for something, because as we all know, Big Barda definitely doesn't need to compensate for anything, so she can just whack you with that, no problem. It is elegantly Kirby-esque while being so simple in exactly what it is. It's a club. It looks gold. It looks amazing, and I love it. So to answer your question, those would be the two: Arm Fall Out Boy's Arms and Big Barda's Club. Thank you for that question, Owen Radical. It was really fun to think about. I laughed immediately when they came to mind because they came to mind in a split second. So thank you for that so much. As always, I want to say thank you out there to anyone who's ever sent in a question, comment, or topic to the show. It means so much to me. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. And it really is just the most wonderful experience answering these questions. If anyone out there has their own question, comment, or topic, you can always find me on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. I want to give a shout out to the cover artist for the show at DOTEMCEE. Please check them out, give them a follow. They're really amazing. And like I said before, there are links to Illuminated Comics' works below. You won't regret it. They're awesome. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and have a great week. See you again next time.